Hello, and welcome to On Point. I'm Chloe Hooper. Many families and individuals every year don't have a meal on Thanksgiving or throughout the holidays. In 2019, according to Feeding America, 1 out of every 10 American families were food insecure. That means they didn't have access to a variety of healthy, quality foods. And in 4.1% of households, Americans went hungry at least twice this year. Children are the most vulnerable, and as the economy goes down, food insecurity goes up. That means the COVID-19 pandemic may make things worse. Before we went to a nationwide pandemic, 35 million people struggled with adequate food supply in their households. But this year, that number increased to 50 million people, says Feeding America. Today, we will talk about how the pandemic has made food insecurity in families worse.
I'm Gina Wong, and you're watching On Point. With me today is Roger Castle, the Chief Development Officer at the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank. So my first question is, we know that worldwide hunger is a crisis and still continues to be an ongoing problem. So could you tell me what food insecurity is?
Yeah, food insecurity is defined by the USDA as when you don't have access to all the nutrition that you need. So some people have this misconception that food banks around the country only feed people that are homeless and they feed them every day, but it's really beyond that. It's people that don't have the income to support all their needs plus get all the proper nutrition. So there are working families in all communities that also rely on food assistance because at some point in the month they have to either skip meals or eat poor nutritious food.
Mm-hmm. So could you tell me why food insecurity has been around for so long?
Yeah, I mean, high cost of living and low wages is kind of drives the food insecurity, especially in communities like Los Angeles and Los Angeles County. If people are paying more than half of their income to rent, they also have to pay for their transportation and then their health care. And so it really drives food insecurity because if you think about it, food is, it's elastic, right? You can forgo food to save money. If you don't pay your car bill, you don't pay your cell phone bill, you don't pay your rent, then those things go away. So people will sacrifice food in those instances.
So could you tell me why children are the most affected?
Yeah, in our community, we're a large community, but 1 in 4 kids are hungry. It's because, their parents don't have the resources to provide enough food. Luckily, in most of our school systems, they can get a federally funded lunch and breakfast. But where are those other gaps filled in for dinners and for weekends? So if those kids rely on school meals, then they don't get the nutrition they need outside of school. And so that's why kids are more affected. And we know that it affects their development, it affects how successful they are in life, it affects chronic disease. So it's really important, and that's why the food bank focuses on getting nutritious food to kids as well as everybody else.
Mm-hmm. So you said that it affects them, their mental development and growth. So we know that students, when they're hungry, they can't focus, right? So how have you been trying to close that gap?
So we've closed that gap by, first of all, when families come to get food from the food bank, and right now at our emergency distributions, those families aren't just adults, so it's supporting those kids around the community when their families can come and get 80 pounds of food from one of our distributions or from one of our partner agencies. The other way we do that is through direct distribution programs. We have a child's breakfast program. We also have an after-school meal and a summer lunch program that we do. Other places run those programs, but we fill in the gaps where we see that those kids in a certain area are not getting food. And lastly, we have a backpack program. And when I talk about the school lunches, if someone is not getting their meals on the weekend, we send them home on Friday afternoon at a school with enough food for meals for the entire weekend, so they don't have to go hungry all weekend long.
Mm-hmm. So now that schools are closed, have you been also helping the school food drives?
Yeah, so the federally funded school breakfasts and lunches are been converted to grab and goes. So those are catered meals that the school systems are organizing. But in addition to that food, we've been circulating to the different resource centers where people are already picking up their grab and go lunches for their kids. We're also distributing food kits of shelf-stable frozen protein, produce, and dairy products. So when they're picking up their food, they're already there. They can go down to our station and grab food for the entire family, and for lunches and dinners and weekends and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So has this happened, like started before the pandemic, or was this because of the pandemic you guys put these into place?
Before the pandemic, a study showed that 1 in 5 people in Los Angeles County were food insecure, and 1 in 4 kids in LA County are food insecure. And if you think about it, LA County would be the 10th largest state. We have 10 million people, so that's about 2 million people. We've seen the need increase markedly because of the economic impact of the pandemic. Our food distribution is up 145%, and we're now feeding about 900,000 people each month, either directly or through our agency partners. So we've seen in our emergency food distribution lines people that said, I've worked for 30 years and I've never needed food assistance before. So although this research is not back on how many people have been affected, we know that number has increased significantly.
Mm-hmm. So you touched upon how the pandemic made it worse. You had people that never faced food insecurity before. So has there been any changes that your food bank has been doing to support them too?
Yeah, and a lot of it's through increasing the amount of food to our partner agencies, which are 700 other nonprofits and religious organizations that get food from the food bank. And then mainly through these emergency distributions where we do large drive-throughs in big parking lots where cars can pull up. We do safe social distancing. The person receiving the food opens the trunk of their car from inside. We load that food with masks and gloves into their car. And like I said, it's 80 pounds of food, enough for a family for a couple of weeks, frozen proteins, produce, and shelf-stable items, and then shut that door. And we can feed about 2,000 families in about 3 hours. And we've been rotating them all across LA County because LA County is a large county in terms of area as well. And so there is, we'll hit Long Beach one day, we'll go to the Valley the next day, and so we'll go up to Antelope Valley. So we'll rotate these around because some of our agencies can't feed that many people, and we can do it in such a short period of time. It's an easy way to increase, and that's why we're up 145% is because of that emergency distributions.
So during the Thanksgiving holiday, have you seen the number of cars lining up has increased?
Yeah, the very beginning of the pandemic, we saw a huge increase in the amount of people and people desperate to get food. And we saw that level off a little bit. But yes, people are coming to food banks because of the holidays. We actually purchased turkeys this time of year, even though most of the food we give out has been donated by retailers, farmers, and growers. But we do purchase some food, and a lot of the turkeys that we purchase are so people can have their Thanksgiving meal or their holiday meals. And so we've seen increases, but beyond that, with the new shutdowns, more people are going to be out of work again, and unemployment really drives the amount of people that need food assistance. We saw in the Great Recession in 2008, the need went higher, and now this happened pretty much overnight, where people were furloughed, and a lot of these are lower wage jobs that those families don't have a lot of savings, and so they needed food assistance almost immediately.
Mm-hmm. So do these food distributions happen every week, every day? What's the schedule like?
Yeah, we do the emergency distributions 3 to 4 times a week, but our agency partners are open at various times throughout the week. So food distribution is going on, all year long, every day of the week around the county. If you need food assistance, the easiest way to do that is to go to our website, lafoodbank.org/find food. It's actually the most visited page on our website, so that shows the need is really great. Or you can dial the county information line 211, and you can find out in your local area. We don't want someone in Antelope Valley having to drive all the way to the west side to get food, because that's a huge burden on them. So we encourage people to find local agencies, and also on that website are the sites of our emergency distributions.
So you touched upon the food distributions. So did you have to talk with other places that maybe needed help as well? And you would like partnerships?
Yeah, so I talk about the partner agency network. It's 700 other nonprofits. Some you would have heard of, Salvation Army, SOVA, MEND, those places. But there's also smaller organizations you wouldn't have heard of if you weren't living in that neighborhood, down to church pantries. And then those agencies can come get food from the food bank for free. Some of it we deliver, some people come here and pick it up, and they can take it back to their local communities and help feed their people. The only thing we require is safe food handling and no, no non-discriminatory policies. So, if you go to a religious organization, you don't have to be of that, kind of religious affiliation to get the food.
Mm-hmm. So, have you ever ran out of food?
No, luckily, when the pandemic first started, there was plenty of food on hand. We had $110 million worth of food donated last year, which is one of the benefits of the food bank, that we're food rescue. So instead of the retailers throwing out surplus, it can go before it is, it expires. It can go to someone who needs it. So that food is donated by, all the major retailers. And then there's programs from farmers to produce food that goes to the food banks. So we were a little concerned that we were going to have to start purchasing more food and run out of food in the very beginning if we projected out a long term. But the USDA came in with this farmers box program, where you may have read or heard that some farmers stopped producing their food, throwing milk out, burying potatoes. Well, the government said there's hungry people. We need to find a way to get this food to them. So they're hiring outside contractors to produce that for us into those food kits, and we're giving them out. The food bank can't make a frozen chicken patty. They can't make yogurt. They can't do, processed milk. But if it comes to us, we can definitely find a home for it with someone who needs it.
So is there anything you do with like leftover food?
Leftover food from restaurants is very hard to rescue because there's a lot of safety protocols around it. So we don't rescue a lot of that. And usually it's kind of a small amount compared to what we do. We do 4 million pounds of food out the door a week. And so this food that we rescue is, usually not prepared meals. Some of it is some of the ready-made meals we get from some of the restaurants, but most of it is something where someone would take it back, and either the agency, the soup kitchen, would cook it, or the person who receives the food from the pantry would take it home and cook it for their family.
That's all the time we have for today. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
Okay, thank you for your time.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Pool party at Jesse's. Can you drive? I'm toasted.
Nope, I'm high. But I can order us a ride.
Okay.
Friendly reminder, don't drive high. If you feel different, you drive different.
I'm Gina Wong, and you're watching On Point. With me today is Nelida Duran, an associate professor of the Family and Consumer Sciences Department here at CSUN. So we know that worldwide hunger is a problem and continues to be an ongoing crisis. So could you tell me what it means to be food insecure?
Absolutely. So, but if you don't mind, before we start talking about food insecurity, a very, very important topic, I just first want to acknowledge that I am presenting to you or talking to you today from the traditional land of the Tongva Indigenous people, past and present. And we honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. And when we think about food insecurity, of course, we think about the benefit of the food that is grown on our land. And I just thank you for allowing me to do that brief land acknowledgement. So when we think about food security, the US definition of food security is means that access by all people at all times to enough food for an active and healthy lifestyle. When we think about food insecurity, we have different levels. We mostly talk about food insecurity with respect to either it being low food insecure, which would be defined as having a reduced variety, quality, or desirability in the food consumed, but without any real reduction in the actual food amount consumed. And then when we think about very low food security, Now we're talking about there being multiple indications of disrupted eating patterns and an actual reduction in food intake. And so it's interesting. So when we think about food insecurity, we actually use the terms low food security and very low food security.
So what's the difference between the two?
The main difference between the two is that with low food security, we change our variety, if you will, possibly the quality, but we don't actually disrupt our pattern. So I may still be able to consume 3 meals a day. I may still be consuming the same amount of calories per day, but maybe, in the where when I was food secure, maybe I was able to include more fruits and vegetables, or maybe each meal was a bit different versus when I'm experiencing low food security. Maybe maybe I buy a pizza and I eat half for lunch and half for dinner. Or maybe my entire day is composed of, when I was in college, cup of noodles was very popular, right? Maybe that's my diet for the whole day. So again, with low food security, it's a reduction in your variety, in possibly the quality, and the desirability. Versus in very low food security, I've actually now, maybe I'm skipping meals, or maybe now what I would normally eat in one meal, I will, maybe only eat half so I can save the other half for later. And again, I'm actually reducing my food intake.
So why has this food insecurity issue has been around for so long?
I always think about, I believe food is a human right. And sadly, I think globally, it's clearly not a shared sentiment, right? Even when you have countries that include the right to food in their constitutions, they may not necessarily put the resources in place to ensure that, in fact, people have access to food. In the United States, our constitution, we don't have the right to food. And so I think it's a reflection also of, our policies reflect where as a society we are. And so I think if we want to see food insecurity and hunger, right, which is the physical manifestation of being food insecure, we have to be willing to support policies that support food as a human right. There is enough food in this planet to feed every individual. There really should be, food insecurity should not exist. It really shouldn't. What we need is the will from nations, right, to come together and say no person should go hungry.
Why is children the most affected by this?
I mean, for different reasons. So we know, the households where children are present are at greater risk for food insecurity. It's interesting that even though children introduce an increased risk, we know that when you look at the percentage of low food security versus very low food insecurity in households, we do see that parents do their best to protect their children. So sometimes within a household, you'll see that the child is experiencing low food security, but the adult is experiencing very low food security. Right? So, I think there's a host of reasons why when we have children present in households, right? It obviously, you're going to have an increased number of people, right? There's one thing if I live alone, or if I just live with, it's just my partner and I, it's a different dynamic when now I have, children present. Also, children, remember, are not income earners. If I'm in a household where I have adults, each adult can work and can contribute, right, to our household. Children don't work, right? They cannot contribute to the household income, right? So that's part of the dynamic of why we see an increased risk in households with children. And currently, 1 in 4 children are experiencing food insecurity. And that's, that's detrimental, right? Because we know that even when you control for poverty, right? So I have a home, right? We're still paying our bills. Even when you control for poverty, when a child experiences food insecurity, there is an impact in their academic performance, right? And we see it in younger age children, but we continue to see that trend. Right now, we're starting to study food insecurity in higher education. We still see that impact, right, of food insecurity impacting academic performance.
When you say impacting academic performance, we know that one of the reasons, like, it's hard to concentrate. So how have you seen that with students?
In a couple of different ways. So one is attention span, right? If you don't have the energy, if you don't have adequate amount of energy, right, it's not surprising to sit in a classroom and doze off. It's not because the lecture is boring. It's not because I don't care or I'm not interested. It's not because I was out having a good time the night before. It's none of that. It's strictly because I don't have the energy to focus, right? So we've seen it manifest itself in that manner. There's also a real preoccupation with an anxiety around where's my next meal going to come. And so, when you think about your bandwidth, the space that I have in my brain to study, to socialize, right, to plan, we find that students who are experiencing food insecurity spend a lot of time planning out their day, trying to figure out, okay, what time should I wake up, right? And some will choose to wake up later so that they can skip breakfast and not feel hungry. But if they were food secure, then they could wake up early, have breakfast, and study. Well, that time is gone, right? Just an enormous amount of time is spent preoccupied with how am I going to stretch my meals? Where will my meals come from? I might attend an event that I have no interest in, but there's going to be free food, right? So you want me to be there for an hour and then I'm going to get a slice of pizza? I'm there, right? And so, a lot of just planning and anxiety around food, and and it takes from being able to focus on studying, right? That said, I want to say that our students, all students, in my opinion, not just at CSUN, but across the nation, as you read the research, are absolutely resilient and are getting through this even while they're experiencing food insecurity. But it is a massive challenge to ask students to do that. Massive.
So you mentioned anxiety issues. How has the pandemic made this issue of food insecurity worse?
So we know, for example, that with the pandemic, we have had to shut down a lot of the hospitality sectors, right? Restaurants, bars, anything dealing with hospitality and service tourism. And that's where a lot of students are able to, or in general, people, right? Not just students, but people. That's where a lot of employment came from, right? And so once you lose those jobs, you lose income, right? And so, we absolutely are seeing increased utilization of food banks across this nation, right? It's interesting that even among here in California, we're one of the most populous states. So it's expected that when you look at our absolute numbers if we look at adults, we have the most number of people experiencing food insecurity. But again, that's more a reflection of just the size of our state. LA, and then within California, LA County has the highest numbers, but across this nation, even states that had the lowest food insecurity are seeing huge increases, right? States like Massachusetts, right? So the pandemic is affecting all households, and obviously when you lose an income, right, it increases the risk for food insecurity.
So on that topic, how long do you think these food drives will have to be in service?
Until both the United States, right, and globally, until there's a real commitment to end hunger, I think we're always going to have food pantries, right? And I think with policy, when you think about how policy gets passed, it's in the United States at least, it's very hard to pass policy that affects only a portion of the population, sadly. And so, for example, in food and nutrition, it's very easy to pass food safety, anything related to food safety, right? Because everybody benefits from food safety measures, right? And right, everybody wants clean drinking water, for example, although that doesn't always happen. But when it comes to saying we want to ensure every house has access to food, right? And again, to live an active and healthy life. If you're a household that's not affected by food insecurity, you may not support that legislation, right? And so, for example, if you look at the legislation, the relief bill right now in Congress, okay, it's great to see they're supporting hospitals, right? They have funding in there to support governments. Okay. The relief checks that were being provided to, I think it was 1,200 for individuals, not in there. Right? Support to expand the supplemental nutrition assistance program. Not seeing that either, right? And so I think, as long as our policies continue to ignore the right to food, we're always going to have food banks, food pantries, food drives.
We'll have to leave it there. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If you or someone you know is struggling with food insecurity, look into your local food banks and food pantries and sign up for a supplemental nutrition assistance program. Thank you for watching CSUN's On Point. You can follow us on social media at CSUN On Point. You can hear us on KCSN 88.5 on Sunday morning at 5:30. With producers Muhammad Assad, Alexia Mersola, Desiree Leon Rosales, and Gina Wong, I'm Chloe Hooper.